Hey everybody and welcome back. So this is our first episode of the second Let's Code series. In this series we are going to be creating a different type of game. This one's going to have a little bit of different functionality to the previous one. So the first thing that we need to do is obviously to download and install Ren'Py, and I would highly recommend using Atom as your editor as well. The links to those are both in the description down below, so feel free to do that and then jump back into this video when you're ready to go. The first thing we're going to do is create a new project by clicking here and create new project. You'll be creating an English project. Change the launcher language in the preferences to create project in another language. So we're going to stick to English, so we don't need to do that. We're just going to hit continue. So now we're going to create our project name, and we're just going to call this one Let's Code 2, for example. There we go. And then we're just going to hit continue again. We're going to go with 1920 by 1080. Hit continue and then just choose whatever colors you want. It doesn't really matter because we are going to create a lot of custom type of things in this anyway. And then we're going to hit continue. And then after a few minutes, it will create the new project and you'll be able to edit it. So now that our project is created, we're simply going to click on the right hand side here under the edit file, and we're going to edit scripts.rpy like that. And then Atom will load, or your chosen text editor will load. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to add project folder. And then we're going to navigate to our project like this. Let's Code 2, we're just going to select folder. And now you can see that our game folder is on the left hand side, which allows us to see all of the files. So the first thing that we need to do is we're going to organize this a little better. So we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call this one scripts like that. And we're going to drag all of our script files into there like so. And then we're going to create another new file, another new folder in this directory, and we're going to call this one data. And what we're going to put inside this folder is things like our planning documents, our change logs, any XML files that we may create. We'll see how we get on with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on that and we're going to create a new file. And this one's going to be called notes.txt like that. You can call it whatever you want. I just call it notes.txt. So this is the file that we're going to first start working on. And all this is going to be is a file of notes that we want to use as kind of an aid memoir to give us reminders of things that we want to do. So part of the initial setup of any project is the planning phase, and that doesn't just mean planning your storyline and your characters and all that sort of thing, but you actually need to plan your script. So planning your script means thinking about the mechanics of the game that you want to create. And that doesn't necessarily mean writing pseudocode or anything like that, but you just have to think about how you want certain things to happen. So for example, in this game, we want multiple characters. We want multiple locations. We also want to be all of our characters. I'm gonna drop that down there like that, create a bit of space underneath here. We want all of our characters to be interactable at all times, and them to say something different depending on where the character is in the story. So story relevant dialogue. So what that essentially means is that I want to be able to explore the game world as much as I can, and relevant to where I am in the story, selecting different characters might have different dialogue. I don't want the characters to have 2 or 3 pieces of useful dialogue and then just say one default thing the whole time, because that seems it's just, this is the 21st century. We don't, we've got to think about the modern person playing the game now. People aren't bored by that sort of thing. you know. So we're going to try and avoid that. So that's something that we're going to take into account. We also want to be able to travel between locations. And we want to make these locations lockable, so that we can have certain locations locked during the initial parts of the game, and maybe you have to speak to characters to unlock locations or whatever. And I think we're going to have a mini map, or at least a nav screen. We'll decide that nearer the time, like that. So we also want in our locations, we want clickable items that we can change between whether they're useful or not. So we want clickable items, and we want them to be able to have a default click action. So for example, if there's a book and you click on it, it'll read you the title of the book or something like that. But we also want there to be we need to be able to change that into a story relevant action. So if we're at a certain stage in the story that requires us to go and pick up the book, clicking on it will give us a different outcome than clicking on it during a different section of the story. So we're going to have to create a way that the game will check when you click on a book if there is an alternative action available, and if not, go to the default action. So I'm actually going to make a note of that. One item, and I do apologize for my typos. Like so. And I think what we need to do is apply that same rule to our characters. No, I think the way that actually thinking about it, the way that we're going to create the characters and what happens when you click on them, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that specifically for our characters, because they're always going to give us relevant dialogue to the position that we are in at the story anyway. Whereas we don't want to have to keep writing new instances for every single item, because you know, there's only, when you click on a book, you click on a book. The book isn't going to tell you something different every time, so we need to create default actions for the items unless there's something relevant to the story. So the story itself, we want it to be a chapter based storyline, so we can go and each chapter going to have different stages. So chapter 1 will consist of a series of events that we can So each chapter is going to be basically a chain of events that you go through. However, the challenge in this game is going to be that the player is going to have to figure out what they have to do each time. When the game is sufficiently large enough, there will be so many items and so many characters that it will become completely unfeasible for them to just keep clicking on everything and hoping for the best. So they're actually going to have to think about who and what to click on each time. So and then obviously one item or character dialogue will move the story forward one stage. So yeah, once you've clicked on the correct person or made the correct decision or clicked on correct item, it will move the story on like that, basically, like I explained it. So now we've got a very, very sort of loose framework. Now we can start thinking about how we're actually going to achieve this. And the way that the storyline is going to work is actually relatively simple, because we can have the different labels for each character, and then we can just append onto that the number of the chapter. So by that I mean, for example, can create a label called Dave, for example, and then we'll just have the chapter number and stage. Thus, the first label for Dave would be Dave 1 0, like that. And then we would just call that if we're in chapter 1 stage 0 and the person clicks on the Dave character, then it will call that label as an expression. So we would say call expression, so we would have to create the label, would be a string. So we would say and this is all pseudocode, you don't need to obviously know this. So we would say string a label to call equals, and then the character clicked on plus the chapter plus the, and I'm sort of writing this semi-code, but it's like so. And then we'd have to obviously input the underscores in there. We wouldn't have to do that on the last one, obviously. That need there, we can do that. Character clicked on underscore, like that. And then that would give us essentially, once the character Dave is clicked on, it would give us this, and then it would call, using call expression label to call, we would then call that. And then so all we have to do is create a bunch of labels for Dave for the different chapters and the different stages in those chapters, so that no matter where you are in the game, when you click on him, it will always send you to a different label for that section, and he will give you dialogue either relevant to the story or just complete waffle, but something about him that's different to when you're in a previous section of the game. And the beauty of doing it this way is that we can create a kind of a puzzle where some people are giving useful information, some people are just making stuff up, some people are just completely narcissistically rambling on about themselves. And that's the cool thing about doing things this way. So the locations, the characters, and the clickable items are all going to need to be classes that are going to have properties. So looking at our information here, initially all our characters need is a character class needs, so they need a name, they need a location, they need an isActive flag, and that's essentially all we need for the time being. If needs be, later we can add more properties, like maybe a love value that shows how much they like the main character, or money, or something like that. But for now, all we need to know is who they are, where they are, and whether or not they're active, because if they're inactive, we don't need to put them on the screen and make them clickable, you know. So there might be characters that the NPC or the PC, sorry, meets throughout the game, and maybe the character annoys them so much that they don't want to speak to him again, so they leave the game or whatever. For whatever reason, we want them to be able to toggle them on or off like that. So multiple locations, need to be lockable, minimap or nav screen. So what we need is location class needs. So we need a name. I'm going to say that this also needs a code friendly name. We're obviously not going to call the property code friendly name, but we can do that. And the reason we're going to give them a code friendly name, I'm actually going to append this, and this is so that we can reference file names. So for example, if you're in a living room or a kitchen diner, those names have got spaces in them, which is fine when you're talking about string strings. But when you're looking for file names, it's much more sensible to have continuous names. So you can still call it living room, but you'd put an underscore in there instead of a space, just to make it easier or more compatible, or whatever you want to put it. So when you're referencing file names, it's easier to use a code friendly name. So that's what we're going to do there. We also need to put an unlocked value on that. And I think at the moment, that's all we need for our location class. Again, maybe that'll change when we get a little bit further in, but for now, that's all we need. So the next thing we need to consider is what our clickable properties need to be. So we'll put clickable items need. So again, they need a name. They need an isActive flag. I think I learned to spell correctly. isActive flag like that. And that just means that we can maybe turn some things on and off depending on which part of the story we're in. And that gives us another bit of functionality, and it's such an easy bit of functionality to add that it would be silly not to. And let's have a think. We also need a code friendly name for these, which will probably think that'll be it for that for now. Bearing in mind that we're talking about the class properties, not the overall code. So yes, for the clickable items, we're going to need to create default actions. What happens when you click on them in a normal situation. So that's something that we're going to have to do. And obviously for our locations, we need to code or figure out a way of displaying the correct background image, and having some way that our characters can be displayed in those locations that don't just look like they've been cut and pasted on the bottom of the screen. I know that some games have pulled that off quite nicely, where the characters all appear in a row. I believe we've done that ourselves in our last Let's Code series. They kind of appeared on the bottom, which is fine. But I think to move on from that, what we should do is for every location we have default way of displaying them in that location, so that if they are actually in there, it shows them and it makes it look like they're part of the scenery and not just pasted on the bottom. And again, I think what we can do is have it so that it will check if there's a default picture of a person to put in the scene. If not, there is another way of doing it. I'm getting myself a bit muddled up here. So yeah, basically what we're going to do is the same thing with our clickable items, in the sense that it will check to see if there's an alternative icon for a person in the scene first, and if there isn't, then it will revert to the default one. So that's something as well. We'll make a note of that up in here. The characters displayed in location, and we will say check if alternative image is available first. If not, show default application image. And all of this will become more apparent if you don't really follow what I'm talking about here. All of this will become more apparent when we actually get into the getting, essentially. So in terms of the planning, this is a really good framework, a really good place to start from. We will obviously cover more of this sort of stuff later on in the series, but as a place to start from, this is ideal for us. So get on with that. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Take care of yourselves, guys. Bye bye.